Hi guys. Um, I wanted to do this video. I'm not feeling very good right now, but I really do want to do this video while I have some time to myself and it's quiet. I told everyone this morning that I was going to be making some videos this weekend about my Lyme story and also to let you guys know what I've been working on, the Spoonies Sending Smiles project. I'm gonna have to learn how to say that. That's a mouthful. Anyway, um, oh God. So this morning it was pretty rough. I had like a lockup or a blackout or something, and my husband basically had to remind me of everything that happened today. Apparently, I worked for 2 hours today. I made my kids breakfast. Um, the landscapers came over. I cleaned off the counter. I made some videos and some posts. Somewhere along the way, there was a disconnect in my brain. The next thing I knew, I woke up in bed with an eye mask on, my dog, and all the lights out. Couldn't quite remember what day it was. Looked up at the clock. I have a clock that shines the time on my ceiling. Looked up at the ceiling and it said it was like 2:15 in the afternoon. I'm like, oh my God, what's today? Do I work today? What's going on? I have no idea. And my husband came running in. He's like, it's all right. And he reminded me of the whole day of I did work today and I cooked the kids breakfast and landscaper came and so on and so forth. And I asked him probably 10 more times over the next hour what day it was because I kept forgetting that it was Saturday and that I didn't have to work. So it's been pretty rough today. I'm talking pretty decent though, so that's good. I just kind of feel really out of it. Definitely got some brain fog going on. Um, Definitely feel some static and some shit going on in my head. So it's just been kind of a crappy day, but I wanted to do this story while I have it in my head and while I have the time and peace and quiet to do it. My kids and husband just ran to go and get me some food and run some errands real quick. So, how I got diagnosed with Lyme. I'm newly diagnosed. I was just diagnosed January of this year, 2019. Very fortunate to find a Lyme literate doctor in my state who happens to specialize in natural medicine, alternative medicine. And he also used to be a pharmacist. So he has a lot of knowledge about conventional medicine and he uses those when appropriate too, which is fantastic. Up until about maybe 6, 8 months ago, I hadn't even really considered Lyme disease because I've lived in the Southwest for 20 years. And while I did live back east, I didn't even think, it didn't cross my mind. I was 13 when we left New York. So through my whole life, I've been sick with a compromised immune system. My mother died when I was 2 from melanoma, which she had when she was pregnant with me and I was a preemie baby. I was born at 22 weeks with severely underdeveloped lungs, and it was kind of touch and go for the first few years of my life, trying to see how everything was going to shake out. I ended up beating a lot of odds. The doctors said I was not going to be able to run or exert my body very well because of my lung capacity. They basically said I was going to be bubble girl and not really be able to do much of anything. And, even living with chronic illness until now, I was able to dance and do track and soccer and bowling and all different kinds of things. And I was pretty much a normal child. So, then we get into my teen years. My dad remarried and We moved out west, and I was sick a lot. I mean, I had the flu probably once a month. I had strep throat once a week. By the time I was done with my round of antibiotics, I was getting a fever again, and the strep was starting to come back. In high school, I had a case of mono that came and went. And then through my teen years, it was just in and out of doctors, in and out of doctors. They couldn't really figure out what was wrong. They just said, eat a better diet, don't drink soda, drink more water, exercise, whatever. And I did all of those things and didn't really lose weight, didn't really start feeling better. And they tried me on a couple of different medications. Those didn't work. Then my parents thought that I had something wrong with me because I was very isolated. I couldn't make or keep friends. I had maybe one or two friends, but I was never really interested in going out and being social. So they put me in therapy, and I was in therapy for many years, and they concluded that I had PTSD because my mother died on my birthday, and because of some of the things that I went through as a child that I have repressed. And ultimately they just said, you need to work on being less stressed out. You need to make more friends, get out more, exercise, diet, get out in the sunshine. You'll feel better. Then my parents started thinking that I was doing a lot of this to myself, that I was self-inflicting injuries to get attention. And then after that, when I was sick, they pretty much left me alone and didn't really believe me unless they could take my temperature and it was over 101 degrees, or if I was like profusely bleeding. Flash forward to being an adult. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 17, and I started using drugs to try to numb the pain, to numb the feelings of self-doubt and self-worthlessness, believing everyone else that they thought I was crazy. So I thought maybe I was crazy too, and I was starting to believe it. So I said, you know what? If I'm going to just be in pain and miserable and alone for the rest of my life, and there's a chance I probably won't live a long time anyway, might as well go out with a bang, right? So I did all the drugs. I went to all the parties, all the bars. I made decisions that were stupid and reckless. And it was just an escape to get out of what I was experiencing and what I was feeling. I was married during this time, in a really bad situation with my ex-husband. And that didn't really help because that kind of drove me further down into the drug path. We finally separated for good in 2011, and I spent about a year and a half alone, living on my own. Got sober for the most part. Drank a little here and there, smoked weed here and there, but, got off of all the hard shit, stopped going to raves, stopped going to bars, got myself a good job, but I was still sick. All the time I was sick. I would have, they called it anxiety, but later found out it was POTS. And my symptoms of POTS became so severe that I couldn't get out of bed to go to work. I would have chronic fatigue so bad that I couldn't get out of bed and go see my stepsister at the time, who lived in the same apartment complex as me. Just a hop, skip, and a jump. I couldn't get out of bed. I ended up losing so many jobs over the course of 4 years because I was so sick from one thing after another, and they couldn't really pinpoint what it was. And then they just said it was stress, and no doctors would give me a doctor's note to accommodate me for work or allow me to take time off of work. And eventually I just lost my job. Ended up meeting my now husband in 2012, and I knew that I was sick, and we still were being bounced around from doctor to doctor trying to find out why. And when I met him, I told him, pretty straightforward, I'm chronically ill. We're still trying to figure out what's causing it. I want you to know what you're getting into because I have a lot of bad days and very few good ones right now. And he said, you know what? Both of my parents, they were ER nurses. I'm kind of born for this because I've learned how to take care of people since a very young age. It's what I like to do. And so that was that. And I didn't expect that he would hold out for as long as he did. He really is an amazing caretaker, and I'm so incredibly thankful for that. But anyway, so he and I were together. We ended up moving into our own house, and we got pregnant with a baby. And it was something that I've always wanted. My ex-husband didn't want kids, kind of strung me along for a long time, knowing that I wanted to have babies and have a family. And then when it came down to it, he decided no, he didn't want kids. He didn't want to have a family, which was fine, whatever. So this amazing guy that I'm with, he loves me. I love him. We have a house. We're doing great. He's got 3 kids. We're going to try to add another one. And here I am. I'm pregnant. I'm so excited. I'm so happy, you guys. And 3 months later, I miscarried with no reason really as to why. I had one doctor tell me that there was no possible way that my baby could have even had phalanges at 14 weeks and that it was okay, it was still a fetus and that I could try again. I mean, it was horrible. It was one of the worst experiences I ever went through in my life. We were going to try again after that, but I think emotions got the best of us, and we ended up splitting up for about a year and a half. Excuse me. And during that year and a half, I moved to Oregon. I moved 2,000 miles away. One of those try to find myself experiences, so to say. Ended up coming home about 6 months later. Couldn't really hack it out on my own in the Pacific Northwest. I was lonely. I was sick. And being sick and lonely and not having really anyone that you know is kind of terrifying. So I came home. Shortly after I came home, he and I got back together. And, I said, nothing's changed. I'm still sick and still don't know why, and still going to doctors and still getting strep throat all of the time. I think maybe 2, 3 weeks after he and I got back together and I moved back into his house, I was sick again with strep throat. And he was at work at the time. I went to the hospital. And the hospital I went to, they checked me in, and I think they forgot about me because they left me in a room by myself for like 6 hours where I had 102-degree fever and my tonsils were the size of golf balls. I had no IV fluids, no medication, no antibiotics. Finally, my husband comes and I'm bawling my eyes out because I'm in so much pain. And he gets the doctor. The doctor gives me a new antibiotic that's supposed to cure strep faster. It's called Augmentin. It has penicillin and something else in it. And he says this is going to knock the strep out faster and it's going to reduce the amount of time that it comes back. So I'm like, great, wonderful, we can do that. At the time, I had no known allergies. So I thought, wonderful, let's go ahead and do it. So he gives me the antibiotic. I go home, I start taking it. Maybe 2 or 3 days later, the strep symptoms are starting to go away, but I'm starting to get other symptoms. It's really hard to breathe. I can feel like a throbbing in my ovary, some stomach cramps. And later that night, by the time I got home, I had hives over about 80% of my body. So my husband called the emergency room where we got the antibiotic script from. They said it's probably just an allergic reaction. Give her some Benadryl. It should calm down within the hour if it doesn't come back. They said stop taking the antibiotics and follow up with your primary care doctor, which I did. The hives, they went away within like a day. They kind of just vanished in hardcore doses of Benadryl. Went to my primary care doctor. He said that the swab came back negative for strep, so the strep must have been gone, and he sent me home. Well, about a week after that, I woke up. It was a Sunday morning. I woke up and I had pain like I did every day, but I noticed my right foot was really sore and my ankle was swollen. Swelling ankles, again, not uncommon with me, so I just got up and started my day. Noticed that there was like a little red dot on my foot. Thought maybe I was just having another allergic reaction. By the end of the evening, my foot had gone completely purple. It was so swollen I couldn't step down on it. And I kept getting this jolting electric pain from my foot all the way up through my spine into my brain. So we went to the emergency room. They did a whole series of tests, came back, don't have strep, don't have MRSA, don't have this, don't have that. Your white blood cell count looks normal. Your CRP is high, but you're overweight. So that's to be expected. But we're going to go ahead and admit you because your foot is purple and we need to figure out why. I spent 3 days in the hospital on antibiotics. I saw every specialist that there was, including infectious disease. They all told me that they couldn't figure out what it was. And I had Googled some of my symptoms, which I hate to do, but I was in the hospital and nobody really knew what to do. So I Googled my symptoms. They said it could be cellulitis. So I told the doctor, do you think it might be cellulitis? They said, oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. We'll give you some new antibiotics that are penicillin free because it looks like you have an allergy to penicillin and we're going to send you home. So they gave me clindamycin. Clindamycin 500 milligrams 3 times a day for 6 weeks. You guys, I was on these antibiotics. And after the end of the 6 weeks, my foot was still purple and it still hurt. Like, I couldn't walk on it. I had to have it wrapped almost all the time. It took about 2 more months for it to heal. And during that time, I got sick 4 more times with strep and had to be sent to the emergency room. They said, well, you're already on antibiotics. We're going to give you this antibiotic to go with it. And then we're also going to give you steroids. I was on steroids for about a year after that because my symptoms didn't fully go away. By the end of the year, in October, I was hospitalized again for diverticulitis in my sigmoid colon. I didn't perforate. It was the first time anything like that had happened to me. I was in the hospital for 2 days, and because I didn't perforate or need surgery, they just gave me additional antibiotics and steroids for the inflammation and sent me home. Told me to stay away from corn, nuts, and anything else that your GI tract wouldn't normally digest. So I gave up corn, popcorn, nuts, seeds. I mean, I gave it all up. Fruits with seeds like raspberries. Gave up smoothies, the whole 9 yards. They sent me home. 4 months later, this was in 2018, 4 months later, January 2018, last year. I wake up, I'm having a strep episode, but there's something going on in my lungs and I can't breathe either. I wake my husband up and he says that my throat is closed off and he throws me in the car and rushes me to the emergency room. The emergency room, we get there and my husband told me that I fainted as soon as I got to the counter and they had to put me in a wheelchair and put me on oxygen and bring me back. But my oxygen levels were normal. So they brought me back. They did all kinds of tests. They found out that it was strep and tonsillitis, more antibiotics, more steroids, and then they sent me home. Now, while all of this is going on, in January last year, I started having really heavy bleeding, which wasn't abnormal for me because being a big girl. Oh, and I've also got PCOS. I was diagnosed with that very early on in my life. Big girl, PCOS, you have irregular periods, you have irregular bleeding. I started my period on February 2nd last year, and my period didn't stop until April, when I had to be put on high doses of progesterone and have a histoscopy with a DNC to try to thin out some of my uterine tissue to see if that would help stop the bleeding. And it did for a little bit. And then I went through 6 months where I didn't have a period at all. So my doctor was fluctuating me on hormones between progesterone and Provera to induce and stop the periods because I was so far together or so far apart that the bleeding disorder caused anemia And that also caused a deficiency in my red blood platelet counts, which caused an autoimmune bleeding disorder called von Willebrand's disease, which I'm told that there's no cure for, but I haven't had any symptoms of that in probably 8 months. So while I'm going through these chronic strep and infections, I'm also dealing with this bleeding disorder. So April, they did that DNC with histoscopy. They found a polyp, removed that, diagnosed me with uterine hyperplasia, and told me to lose weight and exercise. My GYN is probably one of the worst in terms of bedside manner. She calls fat people like me double quarter pounders with cheese. So I haven't actually seen her this year. I'm looking for a different doctor, one that is more geared towards naturopath and holistic medicine, that definitely has a better bedside manner. So I have the histoscopy, I have the DNC. She tells me to diet and exercise. I'm still sick, still going through strep throat symptoms on and off, running a low-grade fever. Started developing tremors in my face and in my hands in the spring of last year. So I went to my primary care doctor, told him about that, as well as the fatigue getting so out of control that I was spending almost all my days in bed. And when I did actually sleep, because I have insomnia, when I did actually sleep, I never felt rested. I felt worse. I felt like I was run over by a truck. So he does my blood work, says my vitamin D is low and that I have positive ANA markers, but it's not titering to any specific autoimmune disease. So primary care refers me to rheumatology. Rheumatology does further testing and sees that my CRP is at like 60, 70%. I have histones through the roof at like 6.97 area. And they're supposed to be like well under 4 or 5. My thyroid is overactive, all of these other different things. And then she reran an autoimmune panel that covered 150 different autoimmune diseases, from lupus to Sjögren's to Morgellons to, I mean, you name it. It was, well, not all of them, but a very wide variety of the most common ones were on there, and it didn't titer to any specific direction. My pattern wasn't speckled, it was homogeneous. So she said that because of that, I didn't meet the criteria to be diagnosed with lupus or any other autoimmune diseases, even though I showed a lot of symptoms for these diseases. So she diagnosed me with undifferentiated connective tissue disease. She increased my dose of steroids to 500 milligrams twice a day. And then she prescribed me anti-malaria medication, which she said that if I had connective tissue disease, it would help strengthen my connective tissue disease, specifically my heart. Because when you have connective tissue disease, it will start to cause calcifications around the heart. So I'm like, okay. So I go to the pharmacy, I go to fill the prescription. It's $450, you guys. And she only writes me a prescription for 2 weeks because she wants to see how my body is going to react. So you're telling me it's $900 a month for one medication. Now, I've been on an inhaler for the last year since this tonsillitis, because I get so air hungry that it zaps my oxygen like that. And of course, it never does this in the doctor's office or in the emergency room when I need it to. It happens when I'm at home with my husband or out with friends. It doesn't happen when I need a medical professional to give me a prescription for oxygen. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I digress. So I've been on this inhaler for the last year. I have these positive ANA markers. They refer me to rheumatology. Rheumatology does all these tests. They diagnose me with the undifferentiated connective tissue disease. And they give me the malaria medication, which doesn't work, steroids, which make me feel like shit, and they send me home. So while I'm going through this whole being bounced around like a ball in a pinball machine. Last summer, my husband fell off of a roof at work, fell 10 feet off of a roof, breaking his ankle in one leg and his knee in the other leg. This happened in the middle of the night last summer, and I was home sleeping. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. The the guy that my husband worked with at the time, came into my bedroom, woke me up to tell me that my husband was in the driveway and that he had fallen off of a roof. We took him to the hospital. Hospital says, they admit him into trauma. We were there for 4 or 5 days. And during this time, I didn't sleep at all, you guys. I was wired for sound. I didn't know what was going to happen. He's the main income provider for our family. I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen? All of these medical bills. I'm sick on top of it. And now he's, going to need surgery. It was a nightmare. So we finally get him out of the hospital. We get him home. He's still going through surgeries and rehabilitation from that accident still today, almost a year later. So after all that whole ordeal happens, I went back to my rheumatologist and I told her, I can't afford this medication. We need to try something else. She said, I'm going to give you methotrexate. It's a chemotherapy medication, and I want you to also take folic acid so your hair doesn't fall out. Right? So she gives me this medication. She sends me home. I'm frustrated at this point, you guys, because I've tried to talk to the rheumatologist and ask her opinion and her advice. I ask her to do more research, more testing. Is there another way, another therapy, another test, some other method we can try to get a more clear diagnosis? And she shuts me down. So then I decided to look into integrative medicine, which I found out is not covered under regular insurance. I tried to find something in my insurance network that would be covered, and the closest thing I found was an immunologist. So I started seeing the immunologist in September. They did a full blood workup. They also did a environmental, food, and chemical sensitivity test. And that's at the same time when some of my neurological symptoms started. So when I was seeing the immunologist, one of the tests they do for chemical sensitivity is a patch test. There's these patches, they've got about 10 little cubes inside them that are filled with chemicals, and they put these patches all over your back. There's usually about 100 different windows total between all the patches, filled with these little bits of chemicals that you wear for 3 days, and then you go back. And if you have a hive underneath this patch, then they look it up and they say, okay, patch number 1 is nickel. You're allergic to nickel. Patch number 2 is concrete, whatever it is. So they put the patches on in the office. I left. My husband went to drive me to work, and we were maybe 5 miles up the road, and I started feeling really dizzy, nauseous. My heart was palpitating. I didn't feel anxious. I just felt really dizzy, like the whole floor was coming out from underneath me. So I had my husband pull over. I started throwing up all over the place. My husband calls the doctor's office and says, hey, this is what's going on. She needs to come back. So we go back, and on the way to the doctor's, you guys, I'm so nauseous. I'm so sick. I'm throwing up into an empty Starbucks cup. So we get to the doctor's office. I hand the doctor the cup of puke, basically. And they get me into a room, they give me a bucket, and they're like, I want you to just sit here. Here's some Benadryl. We're going to give you some Benadryl and see if it's an allergic reaction. They gave me the Benadryl. About 10 minutes later, they came back to check on me. I'm still throwing up. I'm dizzy. I'm nauseous. I can't breathe. My chest hurts. He says, you know what, you need to go to the emergency room. And his office was right across the street from the hospital. So my husband took me to the hospital. They checked me in. They did a full workup, and the nurse that treated me, she said, oh, you have connective tissue disease. My son has the same thing. She said, you probably have vertigo, because if you have connective tissue disease, it can affect the connective tissues in your ear. She said, if it's not that, it's probably just an anxiety attack. She said, something that works well for my son is this cocktail. I'm going to give it to you. And it was Valium, Zofran, and Meclizine, which is like a a prescription strength Dramamine that helps with allergies and motion sickness. So she put me on this cocktail and sent me home. My primary care doctor agreed that this would be good. So they wrote me a prescription, had me try it for 3 months. It didn't help. From what I know, it helped me sleep in the sense that I didn't move around a whole lot. And when I actually closed my eyes, I didn't wake up with insomnia. But when I woke up, I was much more brain foggy, much more groggy. I was a lot more irritable. And that was something that became a problem. But it didn't help the vertigo. It didn't help the dizziness. So my husband and I actually got married here at our house in October of last year. And the day after our wedding, I fell in the backyard because I was dizzy. And then a few days later, I fell again because of the dizziness. So I called the doctor. I said, look, I can't do this. There's got to be a better way. I've been on these meds for months. They're not doing anything. I'm falling now. What is going on? So he says, let's do an MRI of your brain. So they refer me to neurology. They do the MRI, and it comes back and it shows chronic white matter changes in the brain and blood flow voids in the frontal lobe. So the neurologist reviews all of this with me, and I swear to God, he looked at me and said, you know, these are just fancy words that the technician uses, but it's more of like for us and not for you. It's not anything to be worried about. You look like a perfectly healthy, normal person, and it might just be that you need to go see an ear, nose, and throat specialist. And he said, I don't think you even really know what's wrong with you. Now, you guys, I'm sitting in this office with my husband and I have a stack of medical records. I'm trying to go through dates with him because he didn't make any copies of my medical records. And he goes, you know, I think I'm just going to get it from your doctor and talk to them directly. Completely dismisses me and sends me on my way. This was the last specialist that was on my list. I'd seen all the other ones, been told everything under the sun, all these different diagnoses that were incorrect, all these different medications making my symptoms worse. And so I accepted what is. I said, you know what? I'm just going to go home. Fuck it. Forget it. I'm done. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm just going to accept the fact that this is how my life is, and eventually it'll kill me in good riddance. That was my mentality. So I stopped seeing the neurologist in November. It was right after my birthday in December. And that's when the speech issues started and the TMJ. My jaw started clicking a lot and popping out of place. It was really bad in the morning at first, and then it progressed through the entire day. My speech started to decline. I started stuttering where, it would just be a light stutter and you wouldn't even really notice it. And then as the weeks went on, it started getting worse. And by the beginning of January, I could barely speak. And light and sound sensitivity had gotten so bad that I was wearing compression caps and sunglasses like I am now inside during the daytime, as well as at night, outside, inside, everywhere. So December, January, the holidays came and went. I had a lot of time off from work. And I was on Facebook. And I think I was in like one of those groups for chronic pain. And I was posting about a really bad day that I had and nerve pain and light and sound sensitivity, the whole 9 yards. And that I was just sick and tired. And I didn't know how much longer I wanted to keep doing this. This gentleman reached out to me on Facebook and he started talking to me about Lyme disease. And I was like, no. I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, there's no ticks out where I'm at. And I didn't live in Connecticut, and I lived back east, but I didn't live in Connecticut. And where I lived, I doubt that there was ticks. I mean, and then I'm thinking, God, I was so young. How would I even know? And then I started doing research because I thought that, Lyme disease was, oh, you got bit by a tick and that was it and it was done. Um, I started doing research, and he sent me an email with his own testimonial of how he had been chronically ill with late stage Lyme for like 10, 20 years, being misdiagnosed. And then when he finally found out what it was, some things and tips and techniques that he did to get well. And he wasn't trying to sell me anything. He was genuinely concerned, and he wanted to make it his life's mission to help people like me with strange, rare, unexplainable diseases, or in my case, Lyme. And he started a foundation out in California for people with chronic illnesses to try to find the root cause. And I really owe a debt of gratitude to this guy, because I wouldn't have even thought of Lyme disease, you guys. I would have just went home and given up. So me, being the research junkie that I am, I got online. I started researching. I started reaching out to specialists, people that were in the community. And then I came across my doctor, who I'm seeing now. And I was like, oh my God, he's in my state. He's one of the best. He's a naturopath. This is wonderful. I made an appointment, and he said, yeah, this is great. We could definitely see you. It sounds like you might have Lyme disease. So let's make the appointment, and we'll go from there. And I asked him, I said, how much is this going to cost? And it's not covered under insurance. He said, it's not. It's not covered under insurance. And your first appointment will probably be your most expensive one. He said, bring a credit card. You're going to need it. Wonderful. So we get to the doctor's, and he does the Horowitz questionnaire. He does a few other tests with me, and then he goes over my complete medical history. When I say complete medical history, we went from birth until now. We covered everything. Where I lived back east, what types of foods I ate back then, where I might have been that I might have gotten a tick bite. When I first started noticing my symptoms, everything in high school with mono, and everything up until now. I mean, the first appointment that we had was probably almost 5 hours long. That's no joke. And they did the Western blot and the PCR testing there in the office. And my doctor told me, he said, really the two strongest ways to get Lyme disease to come out when you've had it as long as you've had is either through massage or through cardio, exercise, heating your body up. Well, I wasn't in a position to exercise, so he had his massage therapist come in. They gave me a 15-minute deep tissue massage all over my arms and my legs. And you guys, within 15 minutes after that, I was projectile vomiting like The Exorcist. No joke. I was sick as hell, and they ran as quick as they could. They got me all set up. They took my blood, and then they also gave me a GI detox for GI health, where you basically, it's a piece of paper you put on your toilet, and you crap onto a piece of paper and you mail it off to them, and they tell you how healthy your intestinal flora is. So I sent those off. I get a phone call from the Lyme doctor. He says, we need to see you. I'm thinking, great, it's probably really bad. Or they're going to tell me that it's all in my head and that I'm crazy, right? So I go to see the doctor, and he says, unequivocally, he says, you have Lyme. You have Lyme disease. He said, no, I will tell you that according to the CDC, you don't have Lyme disease because you have all the bands except for one, according to their criteria. He said, but you have it. And he said, I'm diagnosing you with Lyme because you have enough of the bands and you meet my criteria and the lab's criteria that shows that you have Borrelia antibodies in your system. The PCRs for Babesia, Bartonella, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and Ehrlichia, if I'm saying that right, those all came back negative. But my doctor diagnosed me with Babesia and Bartonella because of my symptoms, because I have all the classic symptoms of Babesia, especially in the brain, and Bartonella. So that's kind of how I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. A lot of it was done based on clinical presentation, but I did have all the bands for Borrelia except for one. And one of the bands that I have that is the most persistent right now is specific to an area that I lived in Long Island when I was a little girl. So my doctor thinks that I was infected either in utero by my mom or sometime between birth and age 13. I'm 32 now, and I've been sick with this for my whole life. And you guys, a year ago, what started as tonsillitis has left me now pretty much bedridden, in a wheelchair, most days unable to speak, and now I have seizures. They're not grand mal seizures, they're focal. So I am usually aware when they're happening. And my whole body doesn't contort back and forth. From what I've been told in the video footage that I've seen of that, it usually is my upper body, my back, my shoulders, and my calves and feet that are affected by it. My husband has video recorded it once, which is on my YouTube channel, but it's happened probably 4 or 5 times in the last 3 months, 2 months. I can tell you that this is the first time in my life that I'm genuinely scared of dying, because when I found my doctor, I had a little bit of hope that I was going to get better. But now we have a diagnosis, and I finally have a doctor that believes me, that can give me answers on why I feel this way. But it's not an easy fight. Right now, my husband is out with the kids, going shopping, running errands, and having a great time. And here I sit in this bed. I feel like I'm rotting away sometimes. I'm always in pain. I'm always tired. Tired isn't even the right word. Exhausted isn't even the right word. I've reached a level of exhaustion, and my service dog is here with me, and she can tell that I'm starting to wind down, so I do need to wrap this up. But yeah, that's my life story. 32 years of being misdiagnosed. 32 years of having people not believe me or understand me. Losing my biological family because they don't care enough to want to help. Losing almost all of my friends, except for a very select few that, I don't even really get to see anymore because of my disease. My husband and this girl are my best friends right now. They're with me almost all of the time. I know it'll get better. I hope it'll get better. But right now, it sucks. It really sucks. So there you have it. I need to go to sleep, really. So I love you all. Subscribe to my channel. Drop me a comment below and share your story if you'd like. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Chronicles of the Chronically_ill. Feel free to send me a DM anytime. We're all in this together. Bye, guys.